Take it away, Diane.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Okay. Share. There we go. How about that? Okay, so good
Looks great,
evening.
Diane.
Thank you, and good evening, everybody. And thank you, Carolyn and Cindy, again for organizing it, and also Russ White for his technical support. Tonight, oh, why isn't that working? Tonight, we traveled to Peru. And Peru, as you might know, is located in the western part of South America. The part I've traveled in the most is from Lake Titicaca up in the Cusco Sacred Valley area and up to Machu Picchu. So this area here. We're going to start our journey from the town of Cusco, located here, and travel up to 17,000 feet on Mount Osengate. So a little background. When I was young, I used to sleep out a lot and look up at the stars. And I also, when I did mountain climbing, sleeping on the summit of Mount Rainier, I also looked at the stars. So I'm very fascinated with stars. And I'm also fascinated with the human energy field, having self-healed my foot from diabetic neuropathy using Reiki. So I learned of this shaman who connects with the stars and nature through intent. So I was hooked. And I went to 2 workshops in the States. We worked with processes to focus our minds and to also clean our own and the other participants' energy fields. We also meditated and connected a lot with nature. I had some really profound experiences with my energy field so clean after a whole week of working on it. My awareness was really heightened and my perception of reality shifted. So I decided to travel to Peru to learn from Don Americo Yabar about connecting with the living energy of nature. Now, as I was preparing this slideshow, it was really clear to me that it's very hard to put my experience into words. This is an artistic rendition of a participant in one of the workshops of the work that we were doing. And there's another participant who wrote this, which somewhat captures it. He said, "The cosmos was our destination, our hearts, the spaceship, our minds, the passengers. And we had the help of many friends along the way. The trees, rivers, stars, mountains, night sky, and the people who converse with them." So a little bit more background. The Inca Empire stretched from southern Colombia all the way down to mid-Chile in the Andes. Pachacuti here was considered by some to be the greatest Inca emperor who brought prosperity, and he also created this huge empire until it was conquered in 1533. And the Spanish easily conquered the Inca, even though the Inca totally outnumbered the Spanish, but they did not have gunpowder. So the Spanish killed millions of the natives. Some think it's one of the greatest genocides in human history. They also enslaved others. They plundered the gold, shipped it back to Spain, and destroyed most of the Inca temples, structures, and the culture of the Inca. But there were some of the natives that fled into the Andes. And this is a picture of some of them. Those who fled have retained much of the beliefs and the culture of the Inca. They're called the Q'ero Indians, and they are direct descendants from the Inca. For them, life has changed very little since the Spanish conquest. And there's only about 600 of these Indians left today. They live at 15,000 feet in the Andes, and they survive on subsistence agriculture and herding. So my journey, I've been there twice. My journey began in Cusco, Peru. Cusco was the ancient heart of the Inca Empire, and it was central to the Inca culture. Today, there's about 430,000 people living there, and the elevation is at 11,000 feet. So travelers going to Cusco, there's two things that I almost guarantee you're going to experience. The first is altitude sickness, since it is at 11,000 feet. When I arrived there at the hotel, the first thing they did is offer me coca tea. Now, cocaine is derived from coca leaves, but it takes a lot of these leaves to be processed to make cocaine. Coca leaves are legal in Peru and the surrounding Andean countries to stave off hunger and altitude sickness. And the coca leaves are also the most sacred plant in the Andes, and you'll find them used in just about every ritual and ceremony. So the second thing most travelers will encounter immediately are the vendors who are selling souvenirs to tourists. And they call out, "Madame, Madame, buy for me, for my mother, for my family." They are very unrelenting. I finally learned the trick. You say, "Solo esto mirando." It means, "I'm only looking." And there's locals in very colorful costumes. They will pose for a tip. So downtown Cusco looks very similar to a lot of other larger cities where there's tourist dollars coming in. It doesn't have the skyscrapers, but very trendy, nice hotels. This is where most of the locals shop and do their business. And like many cities in the world, there's a gradient between the wealthy and affluent, and then the extremely poor. So Cusco was the first place that I'd ever encountered people and dogs rummaging in the neighborhood trash heaps for food. Much of the architecture has a Spanish influence as the Spanish rebuilt the city. Many of the homes are adobe, built of clay bricks with tiled roofs. This is an adobe, not an adobe, this is a Jesuit colonial church at Plaza de Armas in Cusco. Now this plaza originally was twice as big, and it was flanked by Inca palaces. But the Spanish destroyed the palaces and the sacred sites, and they built these colonial churches where the palaces once stood. But if you walk around the square there, you can see other buildings where the original Inca walls have been incorporated into the structure. There's another picture of the church in the evening, and another view of the plaza at night. It's a fun place to stroll. The Spanish brought Catholicism to Peru. But today, that religion is really a blend of Andean tradition and Catholicism. The most important festival of all in Cusco is called Inti Rama, or Festival of the Sun, and it's held at Sacsayhuama. Sacsayhuama is just a short walk up above Cusco. It's a huge, immense ruin that's sitting on top of the hill, yet only about 20% of it remains today. Originally, it had military and religious significance, and they say or think it housed about 5,000 warriors. What was so important about this site is this actually was the site of the Inca's last stand against the Spanish, and the Inca almost won. After winning, the Spanish tore down most of all of the structures, the temples, and the religious or the military structures, and they used the rocks to build the colonial buildings elsewhere. The smaller stones you see here, I think, are part of a reconstruction effort done afterwards to make it safer for tourists and stuff, but that was not part of the original Inca structure. The remaining boulders demonstrate some of the Inca construction. These joints are so tight, they say you can't put a piece of paper between it. And I didn't try that, but it's very fine rock construction. And they also built it in this zigzag fashion. There's no mortar. These rocks and stones or blocks have survived centuries of earthquakes. The larger rocks were too huge for the Spanish to move and use in their own construction. So they believe that the largest rock in here would weigh 300 tons, and that's 600,000 pounds, huge. It's estimated that it took 20,000 people to construct Sacsayhuama, and that about 3,000 people could have died in the construction of it again. Notice again the pattern of how they put these rocks together so tightly. They're just a jigsaw puzzle. And I really wonder, how did the Inca really do this? Historian Arnold Toynbee said that the reign of the Inca was short because it only lasted 100 years, but they built for eternity. So now we're traveling on to Nevado Asangate. Nevado means snow-capped. It's almost 21,000 feet high. And we're going there by van and then by horseback up to 17,000 feet to do some rituals with the Q'ero Indians. We started our journey at the valley, at the town or village of Tinque, but we're still several days from our destination. This is a couple of the Andean wranglers. They don't look much like our Westerners, but they know their horses. So in the lower foothills of the Andes, they grow corn, lots of varieties of potatoes, and also they do herding. Here's some local children. These aren't the Q'ero, not yet. Along the way, we had our choice of walking or riding or just whatever. Here's a young girl herding pigs. And notice her cheeks, they're darkened. This was really typical of some of the people at the higher elevations. And I think it's due to high altitude UV rays. And her sandals down here are really typical too. Just about everybody who's non-urban wears these type of sandals. As we moved onward and upward, the roads got rougher, the trails got rougher, and we encountered a lot of llamas and alpacas. Fewer and fewer people. This little village is about 15,000 feet high. There's no electricity or water, at least plumbing. Some of the Kiro Indians walked for days to join us. Here are some women. They're carrying all of their belongings on their back with them and wearing these sandals that I pointed out. So whereas most of us were riding horses, they walked this full distance in those sandals and all the way up to 17,000 feet unassisted. They did chew the coca leaves. This was our higher camp at 15,000 feet. I hadn't been chewing coca leaves. And when I laid down to sleep, my head pounded like it was in a nutcracker. I felt nauseous. I didn't have any appetite. So in desperation, I did have some coca leaves. I pulled them out and I tested my beats per minute. When I started, it was 92. And 3 hours later, it was down to 74. So I believe that the coca leaves really do help with altitude sickness. These are two of the Kiro who joined us for the rituals and the ceremony. The woman on the left is suffering from tooth pain. The Kiro have very little access to medical care, living as they do at 15,000 feet. They're also very discriminated against, just like many indigenous people of the world. They live a very hard life as they do in the Andes, and they're really caught between the 16th and the 21st century. Gestating mothers still die from cold and hunger. Here's our camp at 15,000 feet. In the shadow of the mountains, the darkness and the chill off the mountain came down early, but there wasn't any light pollution. So the night sky was just a star-studded jewel. I saw the Southern Cross, the Peruvian Cross, and what really surprised me is I saw the Big Dipper, and I didn't expect that in the Southern Hemisphere. Here we're heading on up further to 17,000 feet. Most of us rode the horses because we were feeling the elevation too much. It had only been about 4 days since we'd landed in Cusco, and now we're going up to 17,000 feet. The elevation didn't bother the Kiro at all, though. They're used to living at these elevations. This is Don Americo again, on Don Americo Yabar on the left. He is called a mestizo, and that's a Spanish Andean mix, whereas Don Benito on the right, he's a Kiro and direct descendant of the Incas. Don Americo has lived his entire life working with the Kiro. They consider him a brother and a living bridge of feeling between the Western culture and the Andean culture. So here we are at 17,000 feet. I've climbed Mount Rainier 11 times, slept on the summit a couple times, but I have never been to 17,000 feet. And I really felt high, and that wasn't from drugs, that was just the elevation. On the right is Gaili Yabar. He's Don Americo's son, and all the rest of these are Kiro. The Kiro are preparing what's called a despacho, and it's a ritual offering, and it includes coca leaves, flowers, candies, and herbs. We were each given 3 coca leaves. And remember, I said coca leaves are very sacred. We were asked to blow into those coca leaves with our intention, and then those coca leaves were added to the bundle. To the Inca, the world and the environment is sacred. They believe in the spirit, that the spirit of their creator resides in the natural elements, the sun, the moon, the earth, mountains, rivers, trees, and stones. So they erect temples and ritual spaces to honor these spirits. For this despacho, the main intent was a love offering to the Pachamama, and Pachamama is Mother Earth, and to the Apu Asangate. Apu means the spirit of that mountain. Then the bundle was burned to send the intentions into the ether. We descended down to this hut where Don Pascal made 2 more despachos. Don Pascal is this fellow, and you can see he's got jeans on and socks. I'm sure Don Americo gave him to him, because that's definitely not traditional Kiro clothing. So anyway, Don Pascal made 2 more despachos. He'd lived his whole life at 15,000 feet, and he was 72 years old at the time. He made these despachos, and in this ritual, he gave back his star. So the Kiro, what they do in their lifetime is they select a lifetime star, and they have a relationship with that. He said he was transitioning soon, and so he wanted to give his star back. Here the Pacos, or shamans, are sitting with each other, and they have mesas out in front of them. These are these beautiful weavings, and they carry around their sacred items on these, so that when they lay out these mesas, it becomes like their personal altar. Please note there's stones here. These are called cuyas. So very rough rocks can be used to clean heavier, dense energy, and the more fine or smoother stones are used to charge a person's energy field. Here they're burning the despachos. The Kiro live in 5 villages around 15,000 feet in elevation. Their culture and spiritual traditions really haven't changed much in the last 500 years, although I do believe they've been influenced because Westerners are now coming to them to see them. So they are getting the influence of us. The Andean cosmovision is that the cosmos consists of a vast network of energetic filaments. And these are like filaments of light. And where these energetic filaments come together and form a bundle is what we experience as an object. Consciousness is seen as an inherent attribute of the filaments. So in the Andean perspective, everything is conscious, and because everything is made of these energetic filaments, that includes everything, the earth, the stars, the rivers, the stones, the animals, us, it's all part of the weaving called life. Now we're leaving the Kiro here at Novato Asangate, and we're going up to a little village called Molamarca. So we're driving north in a van, and we passed a lot of different people doing labor, manual labor. And here you can see these men are clearing vegetation along the road. I also saw people trying to repair washouts. And again, just manual labor, no large equipment used. And even men shoveling rock into a 10-yard dumpster or a dump truck, not a jump truck, a truck. Anyway, having to load it by hand. So a lot of manual labor people, I don't believe, are earning that much money, but I really don't know. The roads at the lower elevation were pretty good, but the further you get from urban areas, the roads get worse. Here, there's a washout. It's not a major one, but it was a road washout. And it wasn't uncommon to have breakdowns. The further up you get in the mountains, the roads get windier, narrower. Oftentimes you have to honk because there's a little sight distance. And sometimes in the wet season, these roads can be very slippery and muddy. It's like this at the higher elevations, and sometimes higher up in these mountains, there's like a 1,000 or 2,000 foot drop off with these really narrow roads. And then you encounter one of these trucks. So these trucks come over the Andes with produce or goods from the jungle. And this is like a Mexican standoff. Oftentimes we were the ones that had to back up, but there really wasn't that many places to pull over. So my heart was racing a lot on this trip. I was afraid a lot. Here again is Mount Asangate, and we're still traveling away from it. Some of the countryside. We're entering the village of Molamarca. Again, you can see the adobe construction. Many of them have thatched roofs. Looks like some of them may have metal roof too. It's very rural. This would be, I would guess, about 4 or 5 hours travel from Cusco. This is schoolhouse for the children. And we're going to a place called Solkawasi, which means house of undomesticated energy. So what is undomesticated energy? Well, we are considered domesticated energy. Undomesticated energy, an example of it would be if there is a mother and her child is trapped some way and she does some effort that is extraordinary and beyond belief that a woman could do that, but she just does it. She doesn't think, she just does it. That's called sulka. And what we were trying to do was to get more of that sulka out of our heads more and into this undomesticated energy. This hacienda has been in the Yabar family since the Spanish conquistadors, so about 500 years. It's very peaceful here. It's a very small community or village and not many other people around. So you hear the wind a lot, the river. We stayed here for about 4 or 5 days. And during that time, we were doing a lot of meditating. We were learning as you see here, we were eating and listening to Don Americo Yabar. He does speak Spanish. And so we had an interpreter for us. We also participated in what's called the hour of power. So a half an hour before sunrise, a half an hour after sunrise, and the same before and after sunset, we would go out and meditate. So when the sun's rising, the energy is rising. And when the sun is setting, the energy is coming down. We had excellent meals there, absolutely excellent, with fruit, and the cooking was great. There's no electricity here whatsoever. There's no plumbing. So it's a very simple lifestyle. This is what it looked like Christmas morning before we had breakfast. And this is the kitchen. That amazing food that we ate came from this kitchen. Doesn't look anything like our kitchens, does it? The cook stove in the middle is called a quancha, if I pronounce that right. So you feed wood into this, and then there's some holes in the top of it where the heat rises for the cooking pots. One of the basic concepts of life in the Andes is called Aini. And Aini means reciprocity, which means there's a give and a take between people in a relationship. We were asked to bring clothing, balls, school supplies, candies, whatever we could bring for the people of the village. And in exchange, the Aini is that the villagers would do a dance for us. Here the villagers have gathered around. The clothing you can see is piled here, and other gifts, and they'll all be distributed to the villagers. Notice the really colorful weavings. All of these weavings are done by the locals here. These are some of the village dancers. They're wearing different costumes based on the lineage that they have. All of these costumes, or the different lineages, are based on the mestizos, the people that have the Spanish blood in them. So these are not Q'ero, but we are at 11 or 12,000 feet, but we're not as high as where the Q'ero are. So they danced for us. They had a band. Over here, the band was playing, and they had flutes and so forth. And then they invited us to join in with them to dance. So again, we were like 11,000 to 12,000 feet high, and it was really hard dancing fast at that elevation. Just couldn't get quite enough oxygen. This is Janet and Placida. Both of them are 5 years old. And when we were there, there was a school program that you could sponsor a child. Janet had an older brother, and usually and no father. Usually when there's not enough money, it would be the boy who would be sent to school, if they even had the money for that. But I really wanted to send some little girls to school. So while the program lasted for a few years, I funded these girls to go to school. Here they are 4 years later. They're 9 years old now. Again, Placida and Janet. So saying goodbye was hard to do because I didn't know, and I still don't know, how Janet and Placida are doing. but we left Molamarca and traveled back through Cusco out into what's called the Sacred Valley and on our way to Machu Picchu. This is a colonial church, and like many, the Spanish built it on top of an Inca palace, using much of the stone from the palace to build this church. But they did leave some of the original Inca walls here. This is a place called Chinchero, and I believe this is what's called the Lost Stone Rock. The Inca carved steps into this rock and then little niches that were like seats in the rock where a person could go and meditate, or the shaman could go and meditate. Don Americo asked us that when we are at Inca ruins to look at from a shaman's point of view, what was more about that. There are many sacred places in Peru where the Andeans, rather than build a temple, they left the site largely in its natural condition. So rather than moving people indoors, they left these places so that it would facilitate people connecting with the sacred in nature outdoors. They believe that each site has its own living energy, and it's either heavier energy or more refined, higher frequency energy. So driving through the Sacred Valley on our way to Mori, I saw a few John Deere tractors. They were closer to Cusco in the bigger agricultural fields, but for the most part in the more rural areas, you would find the oxen like this to plow the fields. This is an Inca ruin called Mori, if I pronounced it right. And it's thought to be part of an agricultural experiment that the Inca might have had. But because the Inca didn't have a written language, there's no way to know for sure what was the true nature of this site. But we were asked by Don Americo to breathe in and to expand, to be in this world, and then also to breathe out and go to my center. At other Inca sites, Inca ruins, we were taught how to transform love and then bring that love into our body through intent, or to another person's body through intent. So it's all working with energy. Here, Don Americo asked us to expand our vital energy by connecting with the spirit of the Pachamama, or the Mother Earth, and then to connect with the cosmos or heavens and become a conduit or a channel to move energy. I really have to admit, I couldn't always do all the things he asked. I'm still a learner. So we continue towards Machu Picchu. About 20 miles from Machu Picchu, there's a falls or something, and the road ends. There is a train that comes all the way from Cusco to Machu Picchu. The other way you can get to Machu Picchu is the Inca Trail. Along here, it takes 3 or 4 days to arrive. I understand there is another trail that's over on this side of the river, and that takes an extra day or 2. We chose the train. I hadn't made plans to hike the Inca Trail. I wish I had. So we traveled from a drier ecosystem near Cusco towards this much lusher environment, and it's all along the Urubamba River. These valleys are very rich and productive. You can see corn here and cattle. And this is the breadbasket for Cusco today, and it also was the breadbasket for the Inca in the past. Another Inca ruin called Ollantaytambo. This was a storage structure for grain. Along the train route, it would stop at times and more vendors selling tourists some souvenirs. Looking out of the train, you can see that the vegetation's getting lusher. At Machu Picchu, it's more of a tropical type of vegetation. The train keeps going past this, but we got off in a little village called Agua Calientes. It's only a couple miles from Machu Picchu. I've stayed in a hotel here along the Urubamba River, and I love the sound of the water to meditate to. It's a small little village. I felt really safe staying here on another trip by myself. They have a square in town and children would be playing in it. Very friendly people. These guys are trying to invite me in to have food there. And it shows alpaca. You can have alpaca if you want. I never did, at least not that I know of. It's very inviting here to walk along at night. And they've got thermal pools, so you can go and soak in these hot waters. Now, once you're at Agua Calientes, there's a couple ways you can get up to Machu Picchu. What most people do is take the bus. It's a half-hour zigzaggy trip all the way up here to the entrance. The second way is to hike up a zigzaggy trail up here that takes 1 or 2 hours to get up to Machu Picchu. If you were hiking the Inca Trail, you would come out here, and that would be the first time that you would get a view of Machu Picchu. This is called Inti Punku, or Gate of the Sun. And here's the Inca Trail coming down here to Machu Picchu. You do need to get a permit to hike the Inca Trail in advance, and you do need to have accredited guides for that. Another view from the Gate of the Sun down towards Machu Picchu. It's about an hour walk. The trail is 6 to 8 feet wide. This is the original Inca Trail going this last stretch down into Machu Picchu. And using your imagination, you can think of a Inca emperor, what it would be like if he were on his litter, which is covered in gold and probably had a gold crown and bracelets, breastplate, and had his comrades and others carried on litters for 3 days, and their troops coming down into Machu Picchu. Still coming down the trail towards Machu Picchu. We're entering the agricultural area. So just get a bird's eye perspective. Here's the Inca Trail that's coming down here, and it enters the city over here. If you traveled by bus, you would be coming up. The Hotel Machu Picchu is here at the entrance to the site. And then there's also the trail that you can hike up to gain access to Machu Picchu. Also note all the agricultural area that they had dedicated for growing food for this community. Even though it's such a large area, they believe that it was not enough alone to sustain the population here, which would have been around 500 people. So here is actually the main gateway into Machu Picchu. That's where the emperor would have entered in through, and all the nobility. Machu Picchu is at an elevation of 6,600. Little is known about the actual purpose of Machu Picchu, since the Inca didn't have a written language. It's believed to be built by the Inca Pachacuti. You saw his picture earlier, as a royal estate or religious retreat sometime between 1400 and 1470. However, it was not a citadel and it wasn't fortified. But archaeologists believe that Machu Picchu was a very ordered city. It had ceremonial function and an educational function. Its location was based on astrological observations, and so it was also considered a religious center. This is looking back from Machu Picchu towards the agricultural area. And you can see just how steeply some of this ground drops off of here. So I'm up in the agricultural area right here. I've been to Machu Picchu several times and found that if I leave on the 6 o'clock bus, I would get up here by 6:30 in the morning, and very few tourists would be here. So it was kind of nice having Machu Picchu pretty much to myself, and I could sit up there and watch the sunlight come and shine on Machu Picchu. Machu Picchu had two really defined zones. They had the agricultural area, and then they had what some people call the urban area. And within the urban area, that zone was subdivided into what's called the aristocratic and ceremonial versus the educational and the domestic. So the nobility and the ceremonial temples, for the most part, were defined here. And the courtyard divided it into, over here would be the educational and the more domestic part of the city. Machu Picchu has, or had, 7 temples. They had homes, palaces, food silos, craft shops. They had agricultural lands, astrological observatories, and more. The people that lived there were priests and priestesses. They were nobility, astrological people, and workers. And multiple generations lived here. The palace of the Inca would be, it's down here. And the reason they know that is because it was the most spacious, it was the most well-built and surrounded by the courtyard. This is a part of the temple area and an astrological observatory up here. This is a closer view going up towards that astrological observatory. Behind is Huayna Picchu, and I want to just point out in this picture, you can see some horizontal lines. The Incas built residences up here. They had structures way up on Huayna Picchu. Called the Sacred Stone, this was built out of solid rock, as it was right there. Oops, excuse me. It's called the sundial, and it sits on top of that truncated pyramid that I showed you earlier. And it was used to calculate the solstices, the equinoxes, the seasons, the month, and even the year. Here's another picture of the sundial. This piece of rock is called the sacred stone, and it mimics the outline of the mountains behind it. In the afternoon, the sunlight hits it, it's descending energy, and they believe that they had ceremonies here. This is looking back at what they call the industrial sector, or the educational and commoners area, with the plaza. Closer look at the plaza itself. So there's many different kinds of stone construction, and I'll get into that more, but please notice that the rock construction really varies here. Here's some of the local inhabitants. They're there. Got to watch out so they don't spit at you. Machu Picchu was built with many natural forms of rock that were left there. I want you to just kind of focus on this one. Here's a blow up of that, and notice how the Inca built their structures right around natural inclusions of rock. There's construction up there. I included a couple of pictures to show you just how vertical this is. Here's a person standing there. You can see stone wall there. Down below are some kind of vehicles. It's just a vertical world. How they built it, I don't know. Again, here's some people standing here in the edge of the cliff, and we're looking straight down. Like other highly evolved Native Americans, such as the Mayans and the Aztec, the Inca were actually living in the Bronze Age when the Spanish arrived. They didn't know about gunpowder or iron or horses or mules, and they didn't even know the alphabet. But the Spanish, however, had been living in the Iron Age for over 2,000 years. That's why they had the gunpowder, and that's why they could defeat the Aztecs, or excuse me, the Inca. So I wonder, given the difference of cultural age, I just wonder, how was it that the Inca could still create Machu Picchu, taking the top of a mountain and actually creating a city with so little industrial knowledge? This is a religious site called the Temple of the Condor. The condor is a really sacred animal in the Andes. Recently, what they've discovered is that the Inca also incorporated caves into the architecture of Machu Picchu. So this is a different view of looking through that cave. And they actually carved this stone to create places where you could put offerings or used it as an altar. But if you can see, there's the outline of some trapezoidal type niches behind, which they believe they held mummies. let's see, I want to go back to that one more time. I'm fascinated by the way that they built this rock, this stonework around the natural rock. Just, that's so amazing to me, how they did that. Machu Picchu had a source of water that was actually Mount Machu Picchu, which is higher than the city itself and about half a mile away. So the Inca, not even having written language, figured out to create a channel that ran half a mile at a 2 to 3% grade down to the city of Machu Picchu. And they did that grade such that the speed of the water was slow enough that it didn't erode the soil. It didn't cause sediment to be in the water. And at the same time, it supplied water for all the needs of the city. Today, that water has been diverted down to the Machu Picchu Hotel. So, and that's located at the entrance to Machu Picchu. So here's where the spout, the water came in, fell down into the catchment basin. Then they created this channel for it to move on. Here's another example, the water coming out into the catchment basin. Really fine, amazing stonework, given they had no iron tools. This is another example of the construction, the quality of the walls. All of this is built out of white granite. And the quality of the rock construction was really a function of what the structure was for. Was it a temple or a palace, or was it for commoners? And also, so the social hierarchy of the inhabitants. Because they had no iron tools, instead they used hammers that were of hard stone, like andesite or granite. But they did have some axes and chisels of bronze. No mortar was used in these walls. This is curious to me because you can see how they've created these steps, and these look very well constructed through here, and yet up above it's totally different. So I really don't know if this is a reconstruction of part of it that may have fell down, or if that actually was what the Inca created. They have a lot of trapezoidal windows or niches throughout Machu Picchu. This is a temple of the sun, and it's a solar observatory. One window faces their winter solstice, which is on June 22nd, and the other window faces this, where the summer solstice would be for them, would be December 22nd. So the solstices were really important to the Inca because of their god. Their god was Inti, the god of the sun, the most revered god. I show this again to show the trapezoidal niches they would have for putting sacred items in. Also looking at the construction, how they made it like a jigsaw puzzle. Called the funeral rock. This rock is carved out of solid granite where it was, and it's believed to be to display mummies before their final placement, and also sacrificial offerings to the gods. And the reason for animal sacrifices, there's a ring on top of there, which they believe to hold the animal while they sacrificed it. There's no indication that there was any human sacrifices here or in the Cusco area, although it is known that human sacrifices were made after there were natural disasters or prolonged droughts. Here's another one of these trapezoidal windows looking back up at the agricultural area. All these niches, they would place sacred items in them. I actually don't know what this site was used for. It is a temple, though. Called the Temple of the Moon. You have to climb down from Machu Picchu, a really steep place using ladder to get down here. This is a huge rock, and they built this temple down below it. And again, you see these niches for sacred items. These larger niches, they believe, held mummies. So one of my favorite things of Machu Picchu is Huayna Picchu, and that's this big mountain right here. It's almost 9,000 feet high and nearly 1,000 feet higher than the city of Machu Picchu. It was used for astrological observations. It takes about an hour to climb up it, and the trail goes up this face. And it's really not for the faint of heart because there is a lot of exposure there. There are places where there's some steel cables that you can hang on to, but there is a lot of exposure. And this is where the hike begins over towards here. You register to climb it, and you have to be down a few hours before the Machu Picchu closes for the day. This is a photo looking down from the summit of Machu Picchu, and you can see that we're quite a ways above Machu Picchu. So the mystery of Machu Picchu is as elusive as the depopulation of the city. There was smallpox in 1527 that decimated many natives. They estimate maybe 50% of them. That was followed by the Spanish invasion and then several civil wars. But the Spanish never did find Machu Picchu. When the Inca left, they believed they had a very orderly withdrawal of the city because everything was taken. They took all their possessions, they took their mummies, they took their objects of gold. All of it was taken, with the exception of some broken ceramics that were located at 2 shrines. The thing that's most important, I think, about Machu Picchu is that it remains the most undisturbed expression of Inca architecture, also of their art and of their astronomy, because everything else was destroyed by the Spanish. I really encourage you to go see Machu Picchu if you can. It's fascinating. So I have some additional slides called Faces of Peru, and I'm going to kind of just step through these. These costumes are from Lake Titicaca area. Again, notice the redness on this gal's cheeks. She is a Carol living up at 15,000 feet. These people are so gentle and so patient. I show this slide because of I just wanted you to see just how colorful their costumes are. This is not their everyday garb. This is Lake Titicaca again. Don Americo offered us a different way of experiencing reality, of being in reality, rather than a different way of thinking of reality. And even though I can't express my inner experience, I offer these words of Chief Seattle, who, like the Kiro Indians and other indigenous people, share a common belief. Chief Seattle said, "The earth does not belong to man. Man belongs to the earth. All things are connected like the blood that unites one family. We don't weave the web of life. We are but a strand in the web of life. What we do to the web, we do to ourselves, because all things are connected. Every part of this earth and cosmos is sacred. For the Kiro Indians, everything has a spirit and a consciousness. And they believe when we connect with that living energy, then we are in total harmony within ourselves, with others, and with everything that sustains us. So before you go, and we are going to have an opportunity for you to ask questions afterwards, I want to show you some things that I discovered as I was preparing this program. I discovered that I have weavings, I have jewelry, I have an alpaca rug, a beautiful alpaca rug, a rain stick, a flute, and other items that I purchased in Peru. I will be at the library tomorrow, at the Haynes Library from 11 until 12:30. I will have all these items on display, and I offer them up for sale so that you can make a donation, and that donation will be made to the Haynes Library. So if you're interested in any of these things, please show up tomorrow at 11. And that's all I've got for you tonight. So much for joining. And I think Carolyn's going to turn it over now so you can ask questions if you have them.
Thank you so much, Diane. We are so appreciative of you doing the program. What a beautiful place and beautiful people. Anybody that has questions for Diane, If you can go down at the bottom of your Zoom screen, you'll see toward the right a reactions with a little smiley face. And if you click on that, and you can click on raise hand, and then I'll let Diane know that you'd like to ask a question.
Mhm. Am I supposed to do something now, Carolyn?
Nope, Donald Poling has a question. I'm going to allow Donald to unmute here. Donald, are you there?
Unmute. I had a hard time finding the unmute button. Yeah, my question is, why do you call that an astrological observatory rather than an astronomical observatory?
Astrological being more the celestial, and astronomical being more maybe the scientific part of it. That is a really great question, but there is a distinction between the two, and I think astrological fits more for the Inca than the astronomical.
Cindy, you had a question?
Hi, Diane. Yes, I do. Diane, that was fabulous. Thank you so much. I really appreciated learning all the details about how people lived and how they dressed and what crops they were growing and all of that. That was fabulous. Thank you. A question I had is a lot of the women had those hats that often the edges were yellow, but sometimes it was red, but they kind of look like pancakes or something. I've never seen a hat quite like that. Do you know what the functionality is and why they have those kind of hats?
I actually don't. I'm so sorry. I don't know, but that's not something that they wear as a daily garb.
Oh, okay.
Or something if you were dressing up for that dance. So they put on more of their finer clothes.
Okay, so then on their daily basis, they would have those sort of tannish hats that were kind of tall with the little brims rounded on top.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. The Karo women definitely had those felt or whatever they're made of, probably wool hats. And then down near Lake Titicaca, where the women were finely dressed, they also had similar hats. And again, it's just a cultural thing. I don't think that it made much difference. If I were living at 15,000 feet, I think I definitely have a hat with a wider brim.
Yeah, thank you. That was fabulous.
Thank you.
Alan Crystal? Alan Crystal, you're still on mute. Are you able to unmute? There we go.
Yeah, sorry. Hi, it's Crystal. I couldn't unmute for a minute there, but thank you for allowing me to. I was just wondering about those colorful weavings that you said they make, Diane, and I wondered, are those commercial dyes, and where do they get the yarn for that? Or are they buying it or making it themselves?
Most of the locals, they take the wool from the alpaca. I'm not sure about the llama, but definitely the alpaca. They actually dye it themselves, and they spin the yarn themselves and weave it. So some of these weavings that I'll sell, they look a little bit rustic, and that's because they are. They manufacture them up in the villages. If you go down to the city, you can get some more commercial type weavings. They're also very bright and colorful, but you won't see that homemade kind of essence to them. They said, I read something that the Inca had something like 190 different colors that they were able to produce, and how they did that, I don't know. But they've always had this really bright, vibrant color to their clothing.
Mary Shapansky, do you have a question?
Hi, Diane, this is wonderful. Thank you so much. I was in Peru and but more in the north, but I did go to Machu Picchu in '85. And you said you were there a number of times, and I'm wondering if you saw a lot of change in Machu Picchu in the times that you were there, either, you know, refurbishing or more findings of new things, because parts of it looked different, and I didn't know if it was my memory of it that was different, or if you noticed changes as you went at different times.
Yeah, thanks for your question, Mary. Yes, there actually is ongoing reconstruction and still discovering new things. So they're continuing with the work. They're still working on it, and there is ongoing change. So I really kind of want to get back there and see what else has happened since I was there with the new findings. And yeah, and I also want to say, Mary, that it was after I'd done that cleaning, the really good cleaning in Utah, the very first time I'd been with Don Americo, and I was trying to see this luminous weaving of light that they say connects everything that is. And I couldn't see it. I couldn't train my eyes to see it. But what I did see, I was out in this dark field after I got back, and I started to see light shooting off the tips of my fingers. And you know what that is? It's an energy field coming off the tips of her fingers. And you were the one that first explained to me what that actually was, because I had no idea what I was seeing.
Wow, how neat.
Yeah, it was
Sounds
very
great.
neat.
Yeah. Well, I've been thinking of you because of getting kind of involved in some oneness meditation things. So maybe we can chat sometime.
Sounds good, Mary.
Okay, take care. Thanks
You
again.
too.
Dawn Woodard, did you have a question?
There we go. Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Before I went online to listen to your presentation, I looked up some prehistory, and apparently their prehistory is divided into pre-ceramic and ceramic eras. Have you done any research on that?
No, I have not.
Okay. Another question, geothermal, or I should say the agua caliente, is that geothermal?
Yes, it is.
And has there been any modern science trying to tap into that or anything?
Not that I know of.
Okay.
After I was there, there was some huge torrential storm that destroyed much of that structure in that site. I know they rebuilt it, but I don't believe there's anything to tap into that I know of.
And their religion, would you call it pantheistic, or would you call it just something else?
I've heard the word, I believe it's animist or something like that. If you're referring to the Inca, Are you referring to
Inca, yeah,
Inca?
well, yeah.
Animist? Is that a
Okay.
word? I think that's the word.
I would
I've
guess
heard.
it's the word, but I don't know what it means.
Animism, yes, the belief in all things having energy.
Okay. And then in their religious rituals and so forth, was there a change or was there ever interaction with cocaine that caused the rituals to change or anything?
And again, you're referring to the Carol or the Inca, or I guess to either one. I don't know, but you know, down in the jungle, the natives use ayahuasca, and that produces hallucinations. And in the Inca, in the Andes, they don't use ayahuasca. They just chew the coca leaves for the sickness, the altitude sickness, and the hunger, to stave off hunger. But yeah, I can't answer your question, Art.
And when you're traveling, the grocery stores, the fuel, the mechanical help and so forth, is that readily available or a problem?
Depends on how far you are from an urban site, but I'd say it can be quite a problem, yes.
Okay, okay. I better get offline. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Carol, did you have a question? I'm assuming CEA is Carol Timon?
Yes, that's me, Carol Mitchell. Hi.
Oh, Carol Mitchell.
Diane,
Hi.
beautiful, beautiful presentation. I really enjoyed especially seeing all your photographs on stones, on the stonework itself, and pointing out the different kinds of stones used for different purposes, but especially those big, heavy stones that fit so completely well without mortar. And how, do you know, were most of those stones from the same kind of stone, or were they all from different areas? Or did you, I didn't hear too much more about it, but again, the significance of the stonework is just remarkable. And I really appreciate your taking so many pictures of them.
Thank you.
Yeah, ooh, it really touched me. So, and anything more about the stones in terms of why I guess that was their only building material, not having trees or anything else to build with, to make structures, to make any kind of enclosures, was all that stonework. But way up there, it still baffles me. But I'm just remarking, thank you so much for bringing us all these beautiful pictures of where you're at. Thank you.
Thank you. And you know that process that you do where you connect?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
I still do it.
That came from Peru. That is one of
Yes,
those
I heard. Yes. It was very special to hear you talk about that a little bit. Thank you.
You're
It means a lot.
welcome.
Thank you, Diane. Bless you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else have questions? Well, seeing none, on behalf of the Haynesboro Public Library, again, I'm Carolyn, your librarian, and thanks very much to Diane for this wonderful presentation, and to Cindy and Russ, and Cindy especially, for organizing the Armchair Traveler series. Our next Armchair Traveler will be on April 14th, when George Figdor takes us through his travels in Bangladesh. We hope to see you all at that in 2 weeks. Have a great evening, everyone. Thank you for supporting your library. Good night.
Night. Thank you.